One shot in the Balkans and the whole world unraveled. A local feud between Austria-Hungary and Serbia should have ended with diplomacy. Instead, it dragged empires into flames. Alliances snapped into place, old grudges reawakened, and by the time the dust settled, the entire world was at war. But who was defending their homeland, and which side was merely trying to seize the initiative and the moment? In today's episode, we will look at all of the participants in World War I and attempt to say whether or not they were justified in joining the war. Hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of Which Side Was Right. We'll get into it straight after this intro. World War I began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. What should have been merely a regional conflict exploded into a global war as tangled alliances pulled in nearly every major power. On one side, you had Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, and it's at some points Bulgarians too. And on the other, you had Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and later the United States, Belgium too, even though they were technically a neutral country dragged into the war. The war was brutal. Trench warfare, machine guns, and poison gas led to millions of deaths and little movement. Entire generations were lost in the muddy stalemates. And then in 1918, 4 years of devastation later, the Allies claimed victory, and peace came at a price. There were broken empires, political upheaval, and a treaty so harsh it planted the seeds for an even greater conflict to come. Alright, so getting into the main portion of the show today, we are going to be talking about the participants of World War I and their motivations, how they got involved in the war, and really we're going to do our very best to say whether or not them getting involved in the war was justified or if it was unjustified and was merely a power grab. Now guys, we are only talking about the reasons countries got involved in the war. We are not talking about acts they committed during the war, the outcome of the war, or anything like that. We're merely going to be focusing on the reasons that they got involved in the war. So the first two nations we're going to start out with are Serbia and Austria-Hungary. So these two nations are the nations that started the war. Basically, I'll give you guys the general gist of how this regional conflict expanded into war we now know as World War I. So Serbia, some of the regions were being occupied by Austria-Hungary, and they felt they were being oppressed, and even their own people did. There were protests marching in the streets. They wanted to be unified with these provinces that Austria-Hungary was occupying, essentially, that were formerly Serbian. It's the thing about the Balkans is there's so many land disputes. It's like Pakistan and India, but, you know, in Europe, or at least it used to be. Now, obviously, people didn't like it. They were shouting things like unification or death. They really wanted these regions back. I mean, you can imagine a lot of people probably had family members in the other regions, but let's hear the Austrian side. So basically, after that, you do have to know what happened to escalate this war even further is they raised basically the Black Hand, which was a spy organization in Serbia. They raised assassins, and these assassins ended up killing the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Austria. So obviously Austria-Hungary, regardless of what they were doing in these provinces, I wouldn't say it warranted executing the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. Obviously, Austria-Hungary was rightly concerned about that, but you do have to keep in mind they were occupying traditionally Serbian regions, and they were certainly treating the Serbians poorly. So after their Archduke was executed, they sent an ultimatum to Serbia, and they refused to extend the deadline when Serbia asked for more time to think on it. And instead of peaceably solving the issue, they instead decided to declare war on Serbia. So honestly, I would say this reaction by Austria-Hungary was not warranted. So I'd say on both sides did stuff wrong here. Serbia should not have executed Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That was not relative to their regions being occupied. There was a peaceable way to solve that beyond assassinating a world leader. And also, Austria-Hungary did not need to invade after their world leader was assassinated. There was a peaceable way to solve this. They could have extended the deadline, let Serbia think on it more. Obviously, Serbia should have given concessions to Austria-Hungary for executing their leader. If I had to say, I would say Serbia was unjustified in their execution of the Archduke, but I would say that in a way, they were justified for the feelings that they had against Austria-Hungary. So for Serbia, I would say this is a mixed reasoning here. There are some of these I'm going to be like, well, some stuff they did was justified, some was unjust, and in the end, I think it kind of it doesn't really provide a clear picture of right or wrong. And then Austria-Hungary, I would say, was unjustified as a whole. I think that they shouldn't have been occupying traditionally Serbian provinces. They should have tried to sort that out peaceably rather than oppressing the Serbian people. After sending an ultimatum, they should have just extended it. There was no reason. It almost makes you feel like they were out for blood, they were out for land grabs, or something of the sort. So basically, this started a regional war. Now, this regional war gradually expanded, picking up a bunch of different players. So we're going to go through all of those players and the alliances that they formed, basically kicking off World War I. All right, so the next participant in the war that we are going to look at is going to be Germany. Now, I'm going to preface this with the fact that we are only looking at the reasons that these nations got involved in the war, not the actual acts during the war. We're going to look at kind of like a little bit into the early war period, but nothing beyond that. The early war period, there was still a pretty likely chance of the war ending. The way Germany got involved in the war is Austria-Hungary was their ally. So obviously, they entered the war on the side of their ally, declaring war on Serbia. There are some things against them, too. They made up the largest central power, and they were instrumental in continuing the war. The only reason this war continued on for 4 years is because of Germany and because of the manpower and technology that they had access to. They had a lot of territorial acquisition in mind, especially France. France and Germany had long-standing tensions over portions of territory in between the two nations. Now, for Germany, I am going to put a verdict out and say they were justified with a slight caveat. I would say Germany's justified in defending their ally, Austria-Hungary. I'd say that's very noble to defend your ally who just had their leader executed. Now, all of that in mind, I would say you do have to remember that there was a little bit of underlying, they were almost looking for an excuse to get into a war, especially with France. So I would say that on a surface level, yes, Germany was justified, but there might have been some undercurrents there of maybe wanting to go to war for a wrong reason. So that's my verdict on Germany. Now, another nation we're going to look at is Russia. So Russia was essentially protecting their ally, Serbia, which was being invaded by Austria-Hungary. That's the only reason they entered the war. Personally, I think that they were the most justified out of all of the nations in World War I. Russia was extremely justified in protecting their ally, Serbia. They were like, no, you're being invaded. We're going to declare war on Austria-Hungary, thus involving Russia in war with Germany also. They seem to be the most innocent of any ulterior motives here. Now, obviously, Russia also ended up, getting kicked out of the war early because of a revolution, but I think that's really irrelevant when you look at this, and I honestly say that they were probably the most justified in this war. They even, I think the Tsar Nicholas, he was actually related to the Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. He sent a letter to him saying, let's stop this madness. This is crazy. Let's not go to war. They were actively trying to prevent the war. I think the governmental power in Russia was extremely justified in protecting their ally, attempting to, stop the war with Germany, all this sort of stuff. I genuinely think that they were justified in this war. And then also we have France. So they got involved in the war because they were allied with Russia, and obviously that dragged them into war with Germany and Austria-Hungary now. If you ask me, I'd say they're also probably looking for a reason to take back land from Germany. They had a portion of land that, obviously, as I stated in our conversation about Germany, there's a portion of land there that is disputed between Germany and France. I think it was taken in the late 1800s or something. So honestly, I would say on a surface level, once again, this is a justified war. They're in an alliance with Russia. Russia is in a war with Germany. So I'd say that is justified for them to get involved in the war also. But there is always these little, disagreements here, the border disagreements that I bet you that they were attempting to get this land back. So already tensions running high between France and Germany. I would say this is justified for France with certain undercurrents of maybe the wrong reasons. So exactly the same thing as Germany. It's these two they were going to go at it in the next few years anyways. Yeah, if this war hadn't actually happened. Then the UK, they joined the Allies because Germany violated Belgium's neutrality, which we're going to get to that when we talk about Belgium. But basically, Britain's whole thing was Germany's just going around breaking all these rules. We can't let them do that. Let's attack Germany. Now, look, this is very similar to what America does around the world with the global hegemon. We flex our muscles all the time like that. But I do think you really have to ask the question, does this justify war? Is this a good enough reason to go to war simply because people are breaking rules? People break rules all around the world all the time, maybe because it's so close to Britain. I'm going to say that Britain was justified in this war. I would say they're actually decently justified in going to war fully with Germany, like actually siding with allies. They were always going to side with allies. Obviously, they had ties with France. They're not going to go to war with France. But really, I do think it's important to keep in mind, and ponder, was this a good reason to go to war? I think it's a very important thing to think about. So now we'll get to Belgium, the country we were just talking about. So like I said, Belgium was invaded by Germany. Their neutrality was violated. Germany was basically trying to go around France's strong border forts that they had by invading Belgium and going north and then going back down south. So they were just going to use Belgium as a road essentially to get to France. Now, France was going to do this if Germany didn't, really. So either way, Belgium was going to get invaded. Germany was just proactive in invading them first. So I would say Belgium is extremely justified in defending themselves after they got invaded by Germany, and they're also extremely justified in joining the Allies when they were invaded. The enemy of my enemies is my friend. Belgium was committed to neutrality, but obviously when you're being invaded by Germany, it's totally acceptable to join the people who are also fighting Germany. Now, the next nation we are going to look at is the Ottoman Empire. So they were supporting a close ally, which was Germany, and they also had, desires for territorial acquisition of certain lands. They were promised certain lands by Germany if they did enter the war. So look, I would say they are not justified in joining the war here. They were not in a formal alliance with Germany. Like I said, they had ties, but not quite a formal alliance. Most reports indicate that they were merely trying to get land. So I would not say that they are justified in this war. Next, we're going to talk about a lesser-known faction from World War I, and that's Italy. So Italy joined the war basically from the Treaty of London, which was a secret treaty they signed with Britain, and then they joined the Entente. They also were looking for territory, and they left the Central Powers after Germany was counting on them for military support in the war. I would say Italy was unjustified in this war, and that's coming from someone who really does like Italy. I would say they were pretty unjustified in this war, beyond making a secret alliance, leaving the alliance you were previously in. They also wanted territory, almost never a good reason to go to war. So I would say they were unjustified in this war. Next, we're going to talk about another lesser-known participant of World War I, which is Bulgaria. Basically, their whole reason for entering the war on the Central Powers side was that they were perceiving some sort of Serbian aggression, and they decided to invade Serbia alongside Austria-Hungary and Germany. Now, Obviously, they were in it for territory. They just wanted some more territory in the Balkans. They were a very aggressive nation, and were really just looking out for their own interests and not for any really moral or honorable reasons. So I would say that they were unjust in their war against Serbia and against the Allies. Now, another nation we're going to talk about, quite a famous nation, if I do say so myself, is obviously the United States. So the United States got involved in the war in 1917. Troops never even got there until 1918 because of how large the army was. Now, look, the reason the United States actually got involved is because of a passenger liner was sunk. Now, to be fair, it was a legitimate target as it was carrying munitions. And also there was the Zimmerman telegram, which I would say these were not adequate reasons to enter the war. Personally, as an American, it's very hard to say, but I would say us getting involved in World War I would say it was kind of an overreach. We are the reason that they won World War, or not that they won World War I so much faster, but personally, I would say this is not good reasons to get involved in a war. You know, if the reason we were getting involved in the war is because, our allies were losing a war against a tyrannical foe, which I'm not even calling Germany a tyrannical foe. I don't think it is. Germany, during World War I, that is. And we can address that in a different episode. But I would say the United States is not justified in pursuing their war in World War I. And I mean, the Zimmerman telegram, if it was taken very seriously, in the end, it wasn't really a threat. Mexico was definitely not a threat to the United States. Yeah, it might be a little bit controversial. You guys can correct me in the comments if you want, but I'm going to say the United States was not justified in this war. All right, guys, so that is all the participants of the war. I would say I might have pushed some buttons there. Modern historians don't really agree with me on all of those that I gave. Now, I'm going to give my final verdict on the Central Powers and the Entente. So I would say the Allies or the Entente, I would say that they were correct in pursuing their war. And I would say the Central Powers were also correct in pursuing their war. And I would also say they're both wrong. There is way too much nuance to give a blanket statement to either side, genuinely. World War II, bit of a different story. World War I, I'm going to say that there is a little bit too much nuance to give it a full, just blanket statement. Now, obviously, many times this is related back to World War II and how the punishments doled out on the Central Powers contributed to the start of World War II. I totally agree with that. I think the punishments doled out were way too harsh, and I think Germany, for the amount for their involvement in the war, they were punished far too much. It was too much of a punishment for their involvement in the war. So if you ask me, I would say that honestly, obviously we're talking about only the reasons people got involved in the war. I would say that justifies the Allied cause even less because of what they did. But we can get into that later, all the after effects of World War I. I would love to do an episode on that. So definitely tell me in the comments if you want one. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this first episode of the Which Side Was Right series. And I hope you guys look forward to the next one. I think it's going to be on the Mexican-American War, which is not a war I know a lot about. So I'm kind of excited to do that one. Anyways, guys, I hope you have a great day and God bless.